All right. Wonderful, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Happy Smarts Happy Hour number 12 on Monday morning. This is the very first time that we have done this. And maybe it's a good thing because it's a very special day to have Mike Norton. And Mike Norton is so hardworking and important and everything that we could not have had this on a Saturday. It wouldn't have been the right thing to do. It's very important that we had it on a Monday morning. Okay, I'm just kidding, actually. I mean, Mike is obviously very, very prolific and successful, etc., but he's also very chilled out. I really like that. Okay, Mike, so maybe we can start with that a little bit. So um, let me ask you this question, okay? How do you manage to think, let's hope that that is true, that you truly are like that. How do you pull off that balance?
I think that I channel all of my stress into my hair, basically. So you can see the level of stress as the number of 7 hairs that I have left on my head. Honestly, I think that part of our job is fun. So like there's a couple other jobs that are like this, but not many, where we get to do what we want to do. So if I think something's interesting, then I'm actually allowed to go and look at it, and nobody can stop me. And that's amazing. So at the end, it's like boring and you have to write and you're in an office by yourself. Like all jobs end up being boring in some way. But I think it's fun because you get to do your thing. I think like freelance journalists is a very different lifestyle. But there again, it's like, what is the thing that I want to pursue? And then I can go and do it. So there's professions scattered. And then some people make their profession that no matter what it is. Like, no, I'm going to do the things that I really am interested in. But for me, even though it gets boring and stressful sometimes, that kernel of we can do whatever we want kind of carries it through to make it fun.
All right. So one thing I've kind of gathered over time from not just research, but personal experience as well, is that you got to stay disciplined if you want to be productive, right? And if you're not productive, then at some level, I'm sure that it eats into people and it makes them feel, what am I doing? This is not meaningful, this is not purposeful. So it's important to be kind of good at what you do, and not just good in a kind of a self-reflective way, but get that feedback from other people as well, that yeah, you're doing important stuff, you're doing good stuff, interesting stuff. Okay, so what is
that I totally agree with. So you can't, this is not my observation, it's probably a million other people, but like you're not actually creative until you make something. Right? Like if you're just creative in your head and you sit in a room, right, it's not creative. Like you have to do or make or say something that people can react to. And so I think there is an element of work. Our things are super boring in the end because it's like a paper in a journal that nobody reads, but still the work of making it, I think is super important. The discipline thing for me is completely social. Like it's all social commitment devices. So when you work with students, then they have to get papers out so they can go get a job. And so you have a commitment device on that. When you have other collaborators, they're waiting for you to do something. And if you don't do it, they can't do their next thing. And so for me, almost all of it's not self-discipline. I don't know if that's a word, social discipline or something, where it's the other people waiting for me. And I'm Irish Catholic, so the guilt sets in very, very quickly. Then it's like, I got to get that out. I might not do it today because I'm lazy today or lazy this week or something, but eventually the social commitment will kick in, and then I'll keep sort of churning things through.
That's a big thing, huh? Okay.
Do you intentionally make long-term commitments?
To people?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for academia is a bit unusual because when you accept a student, you have a 5-year commitment that will end in 5 years. So if you hire an employee, it's a commitment, but it could last forever or it could last for a year and then they move on, so there's like more variability. For us, we really are basically a 5-year commitment, which is a huge amount of time to commit to somebody, for them too, to commit to us. And it does then, in a good way, lock you into working with that person and helping them. And then eventually they get super good. And then they come up with cool stuff as well. And you can do it that way. But yeah, those are nice because one-offs, you don't have that sense of continuity where you're working together for a long time together to create things.
So you said that one of your big kind of levers, if you will, ways in which you self-discipline is by through these social commitments. Okay, but I'm also sure that you're very good at saying no to things, things that are maybe attractive at first blush, but are going to take you away from work, and productivity. So for example, I'll just throw a specific example here. Let's say that you get invited to come and give a talk in India, right? And
what time of year and where? It depends.
right, all that. So that's where, okay, so you're already starting to think like that, right? So tell me a little bit more about how, what do you say yes to? What are your criteria for saying yes to something?
I have a pretty low filter on saying. I think I probably say yes to some things that later on I wish that I had. Well, first off, the general cheesy advice is when someone, and I'm sure people already heard this, but when someone asks you to do something in like 6 months and you look at your calendar and in 6 months and there's nothing in it and you're like, oh, I have plenty of time. Yeah. The thing to do is look back 6 months and see how crazy your life was. So that's just a very, very helpful thing to think about. Like, do I really want to be in that state or that country or that place in 6 months when I'm probably going to have a bunch of other stuff going on? For me, the most fun part of being a behavioral scientist is meeting random people that I wouldn't have otherwise met, who lead me to work on things I wouldn't have worked on. And that means you have to insert randomness in your schedule and in your travel, because if you only go to the places that you already know, then it's great. Like, you see people and they're smart, but you're not going to get the randomness. Right. So I actually sometimes say yes to things on purpose that might not meet my whatever my criteria are, in order to insert like a level of randomness. The one I'm thinking of is I gave a talk in a computer science department a couple of years ago, like hardcore computer scientists, and it was a disaster. It was really bad. They were super smart and interesting people, but what I was doing was not interesting to them, and so it was a difficult one. But I don't regret doing it, because it could have been starting to work with computer scientists on something that I wouldn't have otherwise done.
Right.
Philosophy, I like that.
Yeah, it's like a nothing ventured, nothing gained kind of a thing, right?
And you end up in some boring meetings that you wish you weren't in. But if you get the one that's like, oh my God, I met this woman and she does this cool thing, and now we're going to work on this thing, then some of the boring ones were worth it.
Right. So I don't know if you really answered this question of how do you decide. I guess you said that you have low filters and you say yes to most things. And I guess you're also saying that if I intuitively think it's going to be interesting, it's a new thing, it's an adventure, then you're probably going to say yes. And that's more important than perhaps the amount of money that it gives you and things like that at this stage, right? So, which maybe brings us to the topic of money, on which you've worked a lot. You have a great book, okay? You once called it a medium seller. I don't know if you remember this. Not a bestseller, not a bad seller, a medium seller. This is the category in which I put my book too. Although I'm pretty sure that your book has sold more copies. No,
my favorite joke is to say, because people are always like, you've probably read my book, which is a really annoying thing to say. So I started saying, you've probably read my medium selling book, because I thought that was a really funny thing to say. I don't know if it's actually funny, but I thought it was funny. So I was saying it for a while.
Right. I think when people who have a lot of status are a little self-deprecating, it makes you more human and accessible.
I hope so.
It's working.
The other thing that people do is they say in the book.
In the book.
They don't say my book. They just start saying the book, as though everyone has read their book, and it's now the book. That it's like the Bible or something. The book. You can see people switch actually from my book to in the book I talk about, and that's when you know they've got another level of little too full of themselves. I'm probably there too. I just haven't noticed it yet, but.
By the way, Mike, in the book, by that I mean, of course, my book. I do cite the book, which is your book. Okay. So he's done a lot of work on money, and I think this is a good point at which to kind of maybe talk a little bit about it. Some of your recent work looks at millionaires and their perspectives on money and things like that. But before that, let's take I just want you to give us a short summary on this idea of how important is money, because there's a lot of opinions out there about money. A lot of people say that money doesn't buy you happiness. There's even songs about it. What is your big view? What is your summary of that?
I think that across all of the data collected by tons and tons of people, I think the safest thing to say is that money definitely does matter for happiness. There's no denying it, and there's no getting around it. But it often matters less than people think it will matter. So the canonical finding is if you have very low income and then you make more income, then actually your well-being does improve. Basically, if you stop worrying about food for your family and a roof over your head, then you do have a happier life, and that resonates with most people. The canonical thing is then like after that, it doesn't do that much for you, really kind of wears off, which a lot of people have shown. What we tried to show in our research was we actually, that curve that we have all seen a little bit is doesn't really go out that far, because usually millionaires don't fill out surveys for $5.
Yeah.
So we actually did not have, well, what about if you're super rich?
Yeah.
Is it still like, nah, or does it do something for you? And what we found, which is a little depressing, is that millionaires really are happier than regular folks, is I guess how I would say it. This is a paper with Paul Smeets and Ashley Willens. There we basically show, like, so on a 10-point scale, millionaires are like half a point happier than the rest of us, which is a big amount of, I know half a point doesn't sound that impressive, but on a 10-point scale, half a point is a huge deal. So that's like money matters for sure. But the thing is, I'm going to get the number slightly wrong, but the thing is, like, if we're on average 7.5, they're on average an 8 out of 10. So yeah, they're 0.5 happier than us, but they're not 10. They've still got annoyances, and their family members like screw up and they have to deal with it, and their siblings are weird. You know, that millionaires are still people. So the money doesn't solve it. It doesn't get you to 10, but sometimes we act like it will. So we make all these decisions to try to make more money, as though if we just had more money, we get to a 10. And we really don't see evidence of that.
How do you define millionaires? Is it like everything included, including your retirement account and stuff like that? Or is it like, how do you define it?
In one study, we defined it as income, actually, but even that's tricky, because is it income off investments or income off of, and in another paper, we looked at wealth specifically. We got data from a bank and managed to, that was a paper with Grant Donnelly, managed to survey happiness of wealth holders as well. And again, we tend to find that it's a little bit unclear if income or wealth matters more, I guess is what we would say. But it does seem that whether you're making it like it's steady wealth or more income per year, once you get up to the $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, you're definitely, unfortunately, happier than the rest of us that don't make that much.
So what is the jump between 8 to 10? Is that enlightenment that only 0.001 people get?
Yeah. So we don't see many people, you know, who really say, I mean, of course there are people who say there are 10, but you don't actually see, like, if you plot the distribution, it's often like normally distributed around 7 or 8 or something like that. So actually it varies from country to country, but even if the average level is lower in a country, it's still kind of normally distributed. Like if it's a 7, there's a lot of 6s and 5s, then there's a couple 8s and 4s, but you don't see like tons of 10s or tons of 1s. Not tons of 1s is good, because it means there aren't a lot of people who are walking around at a 1, but not tons of 10s, I think, is, in some sense, people understand that they could be a little bit happier. So, and we do all kinds, it's not just we try to earn more money, we do all kinds of stuff to try to get to a 10. Like we try to find a new partner, and we try to get a new house, and we try to get a new job, and we try a new city. We try all sorts of things to try to get up to 10, but it doesn't really usually seem to bump us that much higher. It's not that they don't matter. It's just they don't like change things. We all have a friend who constantly is like, I'm not happy, and it's because of the city I live in. And so if I just move to a new city, then I'll be happy. And then they're there for 3 years and they're like, no, it's the city again that's making me unhappy. I need to move to a new city. And that's just, we can see from outside, like, dude, it's not the city. Like the city is not the issue. It's you're not dealing with your parents being weird or whatever it might have been. So we often make these decisions that we think will have a big impact. And they often, sometimes they do, but they often don't like really bump us to a huge happy level.
So I should stop moving to a new house every year is maybe something you're saying.
You could move to a new house every year if you're not moving there because you think you'll be magically happy there. Do you know what I mean?
I do.
Like all I need to do is leave behind city X, and then I can be the real me, you know, self-actualized. Because you still have the same friends, you still have the same family, you know, like it's a cool city, but your life hasn't changed, and you're still you. Unfortunately for all of us, we're still us. Even if we move to a new cool city, you can't leave it behind just because you crossed the border.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm getting many thoughts here, and one of the thoughts that I want to pick up on is actually based off of a comment that John Zucker said. There's this 75K thousand a year number that Kahneman and Deaton threw out for experienced happiness, right? And after that, it seems to plateau out. But this finding with the millionaires seems to actually be in conflict with that, right? Would you say that?
Yeah, well, so the thing is that they did not say that it flattens out.
Mhm.
What they said was it has diminishing marginal utility
Okay.
after $75,000.
Mhm.
And what that means is not flat.
Mm.
It just means that each additional increment does less for you than it used to.
Right.
So think about if you made $10,000 a year
Yeah.
and then you made another 10,000.
Yeah.
You doubled your income. Your life is super different. You're happy. If you make $100,000 and you make another 10,000, it's the same amount of money, but you can see that it wouldn't really radically change things in the same way. So it might make you happier, but like a teeny bit. So it was a lot down there and then a teeny bit down here. Then if you keep going out, it still has teeny bits. So every 10,000 again, 10,000 again, all the way out, it keeps giving you teeny bit. But if you have millions of dollars, that's like tens of thousands, right? So all those little teeny bits eventually end up with you being a happier person, even though each increment along the way doesn't do that much for you. That's one of the biggest misconceptions, actually. And they clearly, we interpreted their findings as saying money doesn't matter after 75,000. And that's definitely not what they said or showed. They showed, maybe it's because who uses words like this, diminishing marginal utility. They showed that, it kind of flattens off, but it doesn't flatten. It just flattens a bit, but then it keeps kind of.
Why 75K then? I mean, why not just say that, at any amount, extra amount is going to be diminishing? Why want that number?
They found it really in their data that's where the point was. So in the sample that they used, that was like, if they literally just graph it, that looked like the point where it kind of wears off. Obviously, if they'd asked people in different countries, it wouldn't have been that amount of money. Even in different cities in the US, it would have been more or less because of cost of living. So they never meant like fact of life, everyone in the world, 75,000. What they meant was when you have very little income, money seems to matter. When you get to an okay amount, like maybe the median income, you're okay. And then after that, it matters less. And they're super clear about it. I think we just, including me, I'm not pointing fingers, interpreted it as saying something quite different.
Yeah, so I too interpreted it that way. And I just think that this idea that there's diminishing marginal return seems to be true at every number. Maybe there's a kink at 75K in the US that's particularly noteworthy. But if the idea is that there's diminishing marginal returns, then it seems like why throw out a number? But anyway, my interpretation of their findings was that experienced happiness, which is happiness on a day-to-day basis, seems to really flatten out at that point. But your life satisfaction continues to increase. Okay, and I'll have to go back and take a look at the paper again. And often we read papers, and this, right, that we're biased and we want to see what we want to see. And you said some time back that it's unfortunately true that millionaires are happier. So the word unfortunate is very interesting because you would hopefully like to have seen maybe not that effect, right?
I think it would be nice.
Yeah.
I feel relieved hearing this because it's like inside myself, I'm in this fight. Like, money doesn't matter. Yeah, proven. It doesn't matter. And you're like, oh, actually it does. I'm like, I knew it. I knew it mattered.
Totally.
I knew I should get rich. I'm on the right path. Thank you for validating.
Like both feel deeply true, which is, that's actually mainly why we do social science, right? Is because all the things sound good. Like when I used to teach social psych, I would give some students a slip of paper that said birds of a feather flock together, and other students got a slip of paper that said opposites attract. Both of those are definitely true. I mean, they just are like, they even like they're aphorisms. Of course they're true. And then they would like argue about it. So if I just randomly tell you one or the other, you're like, no, it's similarity that matters. The other people are like, no, opposites matter. But that's why we do research, right? It's like, well, which one is true and when are they true, to try to figure out what's really going on.
Okay, but what's definitely not true is that bald men are sexier.
That is deeply untrue. In fact, there's a study that quantifies the penalty. It's an online dating study. They quantify the penalty of being bald in terms of income. And it's some like outrageous, like $40,000 of income is required to make up for being bald to get interest. It's like some crazy amount of money. It's very hard.
I bet for women it's opposite, and then I make a lot more money because I have less hair. Probably very inverse relationship.
We should trade. You know what we'll do? Let's trade hair for a week and see what happens.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
So I've heard that people who are balding here in the front, okay, are smart. People who are balding in the back are sexy, and people who are balding everywhere think they're sexy.
I like that. Let's all categorize all the people we know into those 3 buckets. Okay, got it. Yep, that's true.
Okay, so now we are talking about dating, I think, right? I mean, we're talking about dating. Okay, so I know that you have some work in the area of dating as well, and Mel actually brought this up some time back, talking a little bit about this idea that we like people. I don't know how you put it, Mel, but I'm going to paraphrase you. But is it true, Mike, that we like to see vulnerability even in our potential dates? The lay theory could be that we want.
Brown said that, not me.
Professor Rao said that. I thought you said something about Mike being vulnerable, or oh yeah, right at the beginning of this whole conversation, you said something about him. Anyway, forget it. Okay, so we. You could argue that we like to see in our partners invincibility. They are the best, and they have no chinks in their armor, and so on and so forth. But that's not what you guys find in your research, right? So, can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the people that you're closest with in your life, they're typically the people who know the most about you. Not always, but
Right.
typically, like if we just plot it on a graph and you had everyone you know, and then you had how much they know about you, it's a pretty straight line. Like when you're little, your parents know everything about you. And then as you get older, they don't get to hear everything, but then your close friends get to hear everything, and et cetera. It's not like one person knows everything about you, but people who know you a lot are also your closest friends. It's like in a way, a stupid thing to say, but it's a true thing. The only way to get to know about other people is to be vulnerable yourself. So I can't ask you a bunch of questions like, tell me all your deepest secrets. And then you ask me and I'm like, no, I'm not answering it. That's just it's not how it goes. It's not how humans work. So we have to, in order to know someone else, we actually have to be vulnerable ourselves. And we dance around, we do a little bit and then we retreat, and then a little more and then we retreat. And you can see it in conversational data. But eventually that self-disclosure reciprocity is what brings us closer together. So there is for sure a sense of sharing not just your successes, but your worries and your fears and your failures. And then the other person can share that as well. And now we're much closer together than we were before.
And you find that when you put out an ad, for example, a personal, right, and you divulge something that could be construed as a sign of vulnerability, then people who are reading it look at that and say, compared to somebody who's not exhibited that vulnerability, they say that this person seems more open, and it seems like I'm going to want to exhibit the same vulnerability as a measure of reciprocity, perhaps, and that way we'll get closer together faster. Is that the process?
We found more the negative version of what you just said, which was, this is a paper with Leslie John and Kate Baraz, where the paper was called What Hiding Reveals. And the idea was that, like if you've ever played, there's many names for this game, but Never Have I Ever as a drinking game, where you say ridiculous things, then you have to drink if you've like never done it or whatever. And then at some point in the evening, like someone will ask a question and somebody's like, I'm not playing anymore. And then you're like, whoa, what happened with Dave? So the idea of the papers, Leslie had this idea, which was when people refuse to answer, not only is it weird, but you assume like the very worst thing. So if you said like, I've never like killed anybody, and then somebody's like, I won't even answer that. You're like, they must be like a serial killer, like something really crazy about that. So we found like the negative end of what you're saying, actually, which is that when we refuse to disclose, people really, really don't trust us. In fact, it's better to say in these studies the worst thing than to not say anything at all, because the worst thing is still like tangible and I can understand you. If you say nothing, then you're not being vulnerable to me at all. And I assume that you're like a really weird person. Leslie found these cool headlines about like, I think there was a serial killer I think in Germany or something. And they were like, we should have known because he didn't have a presence on social media. Which is like, obviously, if you're not on Facebook all day, every day, you're hiding some terrible secret. And it's like, no, maybe he just doesn't like Facebook. But the feeling that you're hiding really makes people distrust you.
I have an interesting corollary. I don't even know if I used that word right, but it felt big and I feel smart. So hopefully I did.
Also try photosynthesis. It's a great word. It sounds very important, but just to throw it out there.
Yeah, I'll put that in my pocket. Thank you. So I just did a resilience training for a whole bunch of HR people. And one of the things they were talking, we were airing out like, oh, what's happening? What's the yuck? Like, what are you going through? And one of the things I heard was people and organizations having big feelings about their CEOs not having a statement about the Black Lives Matter movement. And people feeling like just distrust and losing their loyalty. And the first thing I thought of when you said about, even if you have an opinion or like you have something that's scary, you say it, that felt like such a call to leadership to me. And I immediately thought of that and how that makes sense. Like saying nothing, it's a big deal for people to not know where the ultimate boss stands. It's like a moral dilemma to have that kept secret.
There was a meme a couple years ago, and I have no idea where it was, but it was what happens on the internet. And basically it was like, someone writes, I like ducks. That's just like all they wrote. And then what comes after it is everything that happens on the internet. And one of them was, I don't know the animal, but it was like, your silence on foxes is very telling. And I think it's like an amazing thing, like someone was just trying to say a thing that they value. For example, Black Lives Matter. That's the thing that someone is saying because they think that's important. And you say, oh, you're saying that other lives don't matter. Right? I mean, we've seen it a million times all over the world. The duck and foxes thing is exactly the same. Because you didn't address this thing, you must be against this thing. And sometimes it's true, I guess, that we do that. But typically the person is not actually trying to say the other thing. It's us bringing ourselves to it. And we are the ones that get really mad about it. So I haven't seen it with CEOs, but that sounds so right, that when CEOs say nothing, it's as though they're saying the opposite of what you want them to say instead of them saying nothing. It feels like a statement in the other direction. Yeah.
Wonderful. I actually had another question about dating, but I am also cognizant of the time, and we only have a couple of minutes left for the 10:30 deadline, Mike. And here's where I bring out my pleading self to ask you if you'd be willing to spend another 10 minutes extra. And I totally understand if you have another thing coming up and you can't.
No, it's totally fine.
Okay. All right. Great. Perfect.
Pressure, Raj. That is a bold move.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm one of those exceptions. I have hair and I'm sexy. And so Mike is going to.
I'll stay as long as it's just Elena and Melanie. And maybe we can get another person to do Raj's role. I'll just look in the comments and bring them. Astro student.
Fired.
I'm fired. Okay. All right. If you can, say that to me in Donald Trump's tone, I'll leave. Okay.
The hair. I don't have the hair. It doesn't work.
Okay. All right, Elena, over to you.
Well, I don't know if you already expressed that because you were talking a lot about money and everything, but here people are asking about the book. And so we have several people asking if you could summarize your book, like the main ideas. And this is a question from Janavi, and also Gaurav says that if you could maybe define happiness in your book. How do you define that in your book?
Those are two. Let me do the happiness one first. What is happiness? That's a very difficult question that people in all cultures have been struggling with for thousands of years. But here's how we at least think about studying happiness. I'm not sure if this is the right definition, but if you think about on a scale that you've never used before. So on a scale from 1 to 63, where 1 is I'm as unhappy as I've ever been, and 63 is I'm as happy as I've ever been. What number are you? It comes to you pretty, it's weird. It comes to you pretty fast. You're like 57, something like that, or 49 or whatever. And so in a weird way, it's like, well, what, if I really asked you to like think about your life happiness, it should take you weeks of like Excel spreadsheets and interviews and whatever. but we sort of carry this sense on some random scale of where we are. I don't know if someone says 57, if it means the same thing as somebody else's 57. I can't begin to know that. But I can see that if good things happen to you and you are at a 57, you go up. And if bad things happen to you, you go down. And so I don't know what 57 is. I don't know what 63 is or what 1 is. But I do know that relative to yourself, I can see which direction you're moving. And so in our research, really what we're doing is saying when we do things, we started with money. This is with Liz Dunn. When we do things with our money, do they leave us where we were? Do they move us down or do they move us up? And if they move us down, don't do that. Mm-hmm. If they don't move us much, that's okay. But if there's things that move us up a little bit, maybe we could say you could do a little bit more of those. So that's literally how we approached the problem. And the first thing we did was just to say that when you spend money on yourself, it just leaves you where you were. It doesn't like ruin you. It just doesn't do much. But we showed that if you spend money on other people, then that seems to move you up a little bit. So then we can say, hey, it's cool to spend money on yourself. Just don't expect it to do much. But if you spend it on other people, you can expect it to do a little bit more. And that was one of the really like the first principle that we looked at. That was Liz Dunn and Lara Acton and I worked on that initially.
And you have a few other principles, right? So spend money on experiences, spend money in a way that frees up time for you. I'm kind of forgetting the other two. I think you had 5 principles.
Those are the good ones.
Hey everyone! I just realized I actually do have a 10:30 commitment. Late, okay. And I like to be integrity. So
Mel, you're fired.
I knew it was coming. Mike, you're off.
Right. Adios. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet you. Take care.
Okay. All right, Mike, I had a thought and then it just completely slipped my mind. Okay, so go back, Mel. Elle, back to you. Ask the second question and then I'll come back to the question that I had.
I wanted to ask, you were talking about vulnerability, and I thought maybe vulnerability, is something that is probably the base of friendship between women more than between men. I don't know, because we, as women, we tend to connect and we always share our intimate secrets. Did you do any distinction between men and women in this case, in your study?
We did not, but you're exactly right. So there's research by people who study close relationships, both romantic and platonic friendships. And one of the biggest issues in male friendships is that there isn't self-disclosure. So that men are friends, but they don't become any closer really over time. Women tend to become closer over time. Men's friendships tend to be around shared activities, like fantasy sports now is something that men really like, or golf is a stereotypical one. Women's shared activities tend to be around like things in life. And so those things are more lasting for sure. This fascinating developmental psychology study. It's old. It's from the 70s, so I'm not sure if it's. I kind of hope it's not true anymore. But anyway, the observation was if you look at little kids on the playground, boys play in large groups and they play competitive things against each other. Girls play in very small groups and they do cooperative things together. And if you just think of that's like 6-year-olds. Okay, now maybe that's culture telling them they need to do that. So maybe things might be different now. I hope people don't feel as forced to conform to gender roles as they once did. But even just as a quick observation, you can see that how that would manifest when people get older, where men are still like playing sports against each other, and maybe have a beer after, but nothing about how they're doing. Women have more practice at how they're doing.
So one quick follow-up on that. If you look at least self-esteem between men and women, in general, women tend to be lower in self-esteem than men are. And you can extrapolate that to happiness to some extent because self-esteem and happiness tend to go together. So on the one hand, vulnerability makes you closer to other people. We know relationships matter, and therefore women should be happier because they are being that. But on the other hand, you do find these results. And is it because of other factors? What is your opinion?
One of my favorite papers on this issue, Alison Wood Brooks and Francesca Gino, who are both at HBS, worked on a paper where they just asked people to list their life goals, like really open-ended. Just here's a sheet of paper. What are your life goals? Just write them out. And then they had people categorize them. Like, is this a family-oriented goal or a professional goal? Like all sorts of different goals. And what they found in that research is that if you look at professional goals, men and women list exactly the same number. So it's not that somehow women don't want to succeed in the workplace and do all that stuff. Of course they do, but women list more goals. So women list also many more relationship goals and many more family goals and many more other kinds of goals, which means that men, I don't know the numbers, men have 5 goals and they're all professional. Women have 5 professional goals and 10 more other goals that they also are pursuing. And you can see how that's a harder life, actually, to try to maximize all those goals. So if you think about happy, I don't think they measure well-being in that paper, but just conceptually, if you think about trying to balance all those goals, they're equally important. So you can't just say, I don't care about that one. You have to fight between your goals all the time. And you can see how that would affect your overall well-being.
Yeah, I also had another, because I remember the question now. So you said spending money on others more reliably makes you happier than spending it on yourself. And earlier we talked about how millionaires are happier. Is that the reason then? If you put the two together, you could arrive at the conclusion that they're happier because they're spending the money on other people. And of course, they have the resources to do it. Is that what's going on?
The data on generosity and income and wealth are a bit all over the place. So some studies have shown that rich people give less as a percent of their income. Others have shown that they're more generous. It can start to depend on how you define what is generosity. So if you give to a local food bank.
Did he freeze for you, Elena?
Yeah. Something's happening with the connection, I guess.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, you're frozen, Mike. You're still frozen. I'm going to remove you and add you back to the stream and see what happens.
Hopefully he'll be back.
Yeah, hopefully he'll be back. And if not, then I guess we're going to have to say our goodbyes to Mike. We'll just wait for another minute or so.
Yeah, let's just wait.
And there's really interesting questions here on suicides and all that too. So, the question is, why do men have higher suicide rates? And that is true.
What do you think, Raj? Here's a question also about the goals. So if men have fewer goals, is that the reason why they're probably more successful? What do you think?
It's a possibility, right? I mean, I think that if you have less number of goals, therefore less priorities, I guess, right? Who was it? Henry Ford or somebody said, that if you have more than 3 priorities in your life, then you don't have any priorities in your life. So maybe there is a little bit of that. I do agree with that. Why do men have higher suicide rates? I believe the data on that are that women are equally likely to have suicidal thoughts, but just that they're not as quote unquote effective in actually taking their own life. Men resort to more effective means, so to speak. They just take a gun and shoot themselves or something, and women can't bring themselves to do it as much. And so they try cutting themselves or things like that prove to be less effective. Okay. So anyway, I mean, these are kind of somewhat morbid.
And I also heard that men are more vulnerable, for example, when breakups happen. So, and also reason why men, there are not so many single men. I mean, no, they say that for a woman, it's easier to be single than for a man, even if when they're at age 60, 50, 70. So women are kind of more self-sufficient than men because men need sort of be with someone. I don't know. I heard that it's easier for women to be alone. So maybe that's another reason, being more vulnerable, men could be prone to commit suicide more. I don't know. That could be connected.
Yeah, it would have been great if Mike had been able to join us for these last few minutes, because he'd have been able to shed light on these topics, and I'm not as knowledgeable as he is about these things. All right, so I think we're going to have to stop now, guys. Okay, so thank you, Mike, for coming. I know you're not here, but hopefully you can catch the recording of this. So thank you very, very much for coming. And thank you all for joining us from all around the world. It was a wonderful session. And as usual, we'll put out the nuggets in a little bit. Thank you, Elena.
Thank you so much for your participation, guys. Thank you for your interesting questions. And Raj, thank you so much also for inviting Mike and for your input today as well. Thank you.
Adios. Have a great rest of the week and see you guys this Saturday.
See you. Bye.
Oh, Mike is just here. Let's just say very quick bye.
Sorry, guys. I was trying to get back on.
Yeah. So we were just saying byes, okay? And
Good. I want to say goodbye.
You want to say goodbye too?
No, I mean, I wanted to say goodbye and thank you is what I meant. Not I
Okay.
want to say goodbye. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So we'll send you the recording. And if you feel like it, you can kind of add your answers to some of the questions that came up after you left in the comments. All right.
Great.
Okay. Adios. Bye-bye.
Thank you both. Take care.
Bye.